It's happened. Ankalaev has beaten Poatan, the most popular champion in the UFC with the most fan-friendly style. I've been seeing these reactions everywhere. Welcome to the boring era of champions, quote unquote.
Milk was a bad choice.
Morning Combat also put out a video as well on this topic decrying the bad business practices of the UFC leading us to this point.
The promotion does have too many boring champions, which I hate saying that word, but is it true right now in totality? Because I think the trends are, this is starting to feel like a soulless product. It's hard to make stars when it feels like a assembly line Walmart product of plug and place. When was the last time a UFC fight had you feeling, 4 months in advance, counting down the days?
If you ask me, it's one big steaming pile of hyperbole. That analogy tracks, right?
It's like a thought with another thought's hat on.
Who's from?
For one, I don't care if I was the only one, but I was super hyped for Ankalaev versus Pereira. Maybe it's just because I've been calling for that fight for over a year or so. Or maybe it was just a level of personal investment I had in particular, but I was super into that one. I'm excited for the rematch too. There are plenty of fights I'm excited for. Anything Islam Makhachev participates in is truly history making now that he's broken the all-time lightweight defense record, and I do think he has some worthy contenders before Ilya comes along. But either way they go with that, I'm super into it. And yeah, I am naive enough to think Jones versus Aspinall will probably happen this summer, and I'm clamoring for that one. And those are just the fights I can think of off the top of my head. For me, that answers both the star question and the last fight I've been excited about in the last 4 months. I mean, we had UFC 300 last year. There was a lot of great events. And to get back to the boring idea, I suppose the accused boring champions right now are Ankalaev, Belal, and Pantoja. You could say Merab, but I think he won the crowd over, especially in the Umar fight. I still personally don't buy that Ankalaev is boring when he's the one who rocked Pereira in that fight. Sure, round 4 was not the greatest, but title fights have boring rounds. That happens. Anyhow, let's just give you all three, and for the sake of argument, say they were all boring. Is that even unique, though? Well, go back the last 10 years, and there has been 2, 3, sometimes even more than that, of the quote-unquote boring champions every single year. Even when you go back to the most popular years. In 2016, for instance, the magical $600 million year for the UFC.
But we'll generate about $600 million in revenue.
The year people still kind of liked McGregor. He had a lot of bangers in that one year. Rousey was still around, of course. So it was all pretty massive. You get the point. A golden era of the sport. There were 3 boring champions. This is the year Tyron Woodley became champion. Can you tell me of a more boring fight than the Thompson rematch? Actually, it might be worse with the Maia fight. Between those 2 fights, it legitimately made him one of the most boring champions of all time. I disagreed with it at the time, but people did regard DC as an undeserving and boring champion by 2016. You know, because Jones kept fucking up, so they blamed him for that for some reason.
I just can't believe you got that belt. This belt is the belt that I won when I fought Shogun, all right? I respect what he's done. You guys ready to see DC get his ass whooped again?
But also that year was the Anderson Silva UFC 200 WrestleFest. It really didn't help his case.
The audience is chanting, stand up.
I would say to you, you go and stand in front of Anderson Silva for 15 minutes if you have the ability to take him down.
And again with Demetrius Johnson, he was never appreciated in his time and was consistently being given shit by the fans.
Did the booze bother you at all?
The fans are fans. They're just fucking idiots.
Was it disappointing to you as a fight fan? You know, Demetrius Johnson is so freaking good, and you hear people booing him, and it was
but
like,
you're always going to have
you?
drunk dummies out there.
What's funny about those divisions is they are all the same 3 quote-unquote boring divisions that had boring champions. It's the same 3 divisions today. I still think those back-to-back fights from Woodley were the most boring ever, literally. Or what about the COVID boom in 2020? The UFC was the only live sport running, and they gained a massive amount of new first-time fans. Who could forget Usman versus Masvidal 1? That's literally the meme fight, the foot stomp fight.
Can I see your feet after he stomped the crap out of them for 3 rounds, 5 rounds?
Even Izzy was in this weird spot. He was just coming off the Yoel Romero fight and got blamed by large swaths of fans for how boring that fight ended up being, even though you could just as much blame Yoel for it.
Like, what's he doing?
And he did end up rebounding with a really nice fight against Costa, but you look at the Vettori fights, you look at the Cannonier fights that were just after this. The Cannonier fight was the Undertaker-Mean fight. It was not a great fight. It was actually pretty terrible. I personally would not have called him boring, but a lot of fans did, and that's the point of this video. What did fans think? It didn't help that he had 3 back-to-back decisions by the time Alex Pereira rejuvenated his title reign. And of course, there was Aljo in 2021 at 135 pounds. That guy was pretty much continuously booed from the start of his reign to the end of it, including in his home state. It wasn't just the yawn stuff, it was also the way he won his fights. People thought he was boring. And this is pretty much consistently true of every single year. I did check, I looked through the last 10 years. I'm just focusing on these years in particular because they are major boom periods for the sport. But again, the amount of quote-unquote boring champions we have now just simply aren't unique, and almost every year just have 2 or 3 heavily disliked champions that were considered boring by the fans' perspective. Right or wrong, that's how fans felt, and that's how fans feel about these 3 champions now. On the note of the UFC's business model being pretty terrible lately and stretched out to this, well, abysmal fight calendar, yeah, the Apex is devoid of life. It's an absolute hellhole, and outside of the Contender Series, I think it's a dog shit way to watch fights. The whole point of the Contender Series is it's meant to be this really tense audition process where you can hear a pin drop in the building. For a full-on live event, it's not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be a hyped event in front of a packed stadium. It's supposed to be really fun, exciting. These 2 things should be treated entirely differently. And did you guys see this the other day? Mark Shapiro, the COO of the UFC's parent company, TKO, tried to claim fans apparently can't see, and as a television presentation, feels fans can't tell the difference between a packed stadium and practically a 20-person room. By the way, here's Mark Shapiro in awe of fans at a recent event for the WWE. Spoiler alert, the guy can tell when there are fans in the arena. I don't think I've ever heard someone sound so out of touch with their own fan base than this exact moment. Except maybe Don Davis. Don Davis is more out of touch.
What is Don's favorite all-time MMA fight?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to answer it differently. It's boxing for me.
We're PFL.
And I do think the Apex events are driving away new fans. There's no doubt about it. If the atmosphere for a fight isn't fun and a lot of these fight nights are lackluster, well, yeah, why would fans want to stick around and watch these events while staying home on a Saturday night? To play devil's advocate, though, at least in terms of shit quality cards, the UFC has been holding way too many events and stretching themselves too thin for a long time now. Over the last summer, in one of my videos, I touched over the fact that the UFC booked 47 events in 2014. That got knocked down to 46 because one of the cards was so thin that they had to cancel it entirely. Aldo versus Mendez too, they had to rebook it. It's actually down from that number to 43 events now. They've been doing this for over 10 years and it hasn't stopped them from growing as a brand. I don't think that's the biggest problem here, but you pair that with the shitty quality of an Apex event, and yeah, it's like a 1-2 punch for fans to stop watching on a Saturday night. And I think that ties into what I hope the UFC does with their next rights deal. When Dana White is acknowledging at a press conference just how bad ESPN Plus fucked up in the middle of their exclusive negotiation period.
I haven't seen so. I saw a lot of people complaining on X Twitter tonight they couldn't buy the pay-per-view. Did that make it to you? Do you know?
Yeah, yeah, it made it to me. I don't know what happened with their platform tonight, but yeah, there were a lot of pissed off people.
Yeah, my guess is the UFC is going to want to switch broadcast partners. And we've been saying it forever here, as many of you have too, that I hope they just go to Netflix, and I hope this means they choose to be a little smarter with this next deal. Just cut down the number of events a little bit. Let's get down to maybe 35 instead of 43. It's not traditional TV anymore. You don't have to have this rigorous, non-stop, crazy schedule. Half the shows are just put up so you can binge watch the entire series in one day. They're totally okay with having big events that have a lot of viewership rather than spreading it out. And it's silly to keep doing this when the fan base is getting more and more fed up with this sort of thing. You don't need weekly events. You just don't. But something tells me this Mark Shapiro guy doesn't really care about the long-term health health of his product and just wants to get the biggest buck now. After all, we can't even tell when it's an Apex event or a real UFC event. That's what I'm going to start calling them. Arena events are real UFC events. Anyhow, all that is to say, there's plenty I'm happy to complain about with the UFC, but I don't think this boring era champions thing is a realistic concern. I just don't. It's super overblown. And a last point to add to that, to really pin this down, I was also chatting with my dude Lionel Rivera, who, if you don't know his channel, you really should check it out. The guy makes awesome content. When I was talking to him, he brought up the fact that, let's say you disagree with me fully on all these points about the boring era of champions. That's fine. Pereira is gonna most likely get an immediate title rematch. Dana basically already said that at the press conference.
Do you lean towards immediate rematch?
Probably.
And Belal, well, he's got to fight Shavkat next. I don't care how bad his performance was against Ian Gary. He was facing a lot of injuries in that fight, and I think he'll look a lot better against Belal. Belal is 36 years old, guys. Father Time is undefeated. Again, I don't even necessarily have a problem with Belal, but if you do have a problem with these guys and you feel like this is the boring era, well, it could be over within 1 year. And those are two of the three champions that fans feel are the most boring. For Pantoja, yeah, he's probably going to be champ for a while, but when was flyweight not struggling outside of a couple of relatively short glimpses of decent popularity? Again, I talked about this with how DJ was regarded unfairly during his historic run, and that's what this discussion is really about. It's about fan perception. A lot of these champions people thought were boring. I've disagreed with them too, but that was fan perception. Anyhow, I've just been seeing a ton of crazy hot takes over the last week, and hopefully, if nothing else, through watching this, you get a bit of balance against the raging hot takes in the wake of a popular champ losing their belt. Every popular champion outside of only one or two people in the entire history of the sport has had to lose their belt at some point or another, and it hasn't always been a champion people were hyped about. Many of them people thought, in fact, were boring. And that's what makes MMA a true sport. All those entertainment antics, they go away at some point. At the end of the day, they have to fight and somebody's got to win. It's reality and you can't script that.
That's fucking illegal.
So there it is, guys. Hit me up with your disagreements. Let me know where you thought I was totally off base. By the way, I really enjoyed that morning combat video, so this isn't meant to be some kind of takedown of their video. This is just the points I happen to disagree with, but I thought they made a lot of great points in that video too. I welcome the discussion. We can chat about it in the comments. Shout out to our channel members. You guys are awesome. Thank you all for supporting the channel. If you're interested in supporting, you can get all kinds of exclusive content. In the meantime, if you're not interested in that, please help us out with this channel by liking and subscribing, and we'll see you on the next video. Peace.